Hi guys. So let me take you through a few of the changes I've just made here. Nothing much. If you remember, I had some misbehaving point velocities on this middle sim, and that was the ones that the motion blur was stretching all the way down into the scene. So instead of just removing the velocity, what I did was in this color multiplier wrangle, I've added a clamp. So I just looked at the render and at the general velocity values and just made sure that they never peak above or below 5, and that seemed to control those ones that were overshooting. The only other thing I really changed, if you look, most of this is the same, but I had a problem, and the problem was every time I did a test render before frame 15, it was taking extremely long, and that's basically just to render this small area over here. I'll show you. So when the portal is basically as small as a dot before it's even opened up, I guess there was some very high velocity values, so that was making the motion blur take forever to render. So I've just put in a switch for each one of these, and I've removed velocity, and I put a switch here and said after frame 15 switch to the normal chain that does have velocity, and that fixed the render times here before frame 15. So at this point I think we're good to move on, and the first thing I wanted to do was just check the environment render. So if we just go to a frame like this, I'll put down a mantra, full frame, cam. I'll just do 2/3 resolution for now, and we'll leave everything else as default, I guess. And let's see how it looks. Make sure you're displaying the LUT. So that all seems to be fine. You can see the environment light is having an effect, and then I have a spotlight, which is just this subtle light in the foreground to kind of pick up the character as he runs forward. And I might just switch on the environment light, render light geometry, just so we can get ourselves a cheap sky. So that seems to be all good, and it's rendering pretty quick. So let's go ahead and make a light from one of the particle sims. Now the one thing is, because I'm working on a laptop and I don't have a render farm, I think I'll be splitting this up into more render layers than I usually would. So at work I'd probably try and get as much into one mantra render as I can, but for one, Magic kind of lends itself to having as many layers as possible for the comp anyway, and the second part of that is to save us time. So if I add a light for the portal affecting the environment, I'll split that into a separate mantra, and so that if we don't like the way the light works later on, that's the only pass I'll need to re-render, instead of having to render the character and the environment again. So let's jump back into the portal here, and what I want is I want to take one of these particle layers. Let's take this one, and I just want to convert this into a polygon mesh. So let's do VDB from particles, and then before I even plug anything in, I'm just going to scale this point radius way down, because that's usually when you get some kind of crash if the p-scale is too big. So we convert that, and then I'll convert that straight away into polygons. And just a note here as well, I found that if I'm converting like a polygon mesh into a VDB and doing some stuff and then converting it back into polys, the default ISO value is 0, and that always seems to have a slightly thinner result than the original mesh. So for me, I've found that if you just use the voxel size as the ISO value, you get the most accurate, the accurate spacing. So like if I have a teapot and I convert it to VDB and then back to polys, my most accurate refit is using the same values for these two. So let's go a bit smaller here. And then what we want basically is we only need light where the portal is the brightest. So I'm expecting somewhere all around the inner circle, and then maybe some of the bright highlights to have our geometry. And as it goes dark, or as the alpha falls off, we can remove that from the mesh, and we don't need that to cast light. So let me take one of these p-scale wrangles and I'll put that in here. So now obviously our p-scale is very low. .01. And then what I want to do is basically multiply the p-scale by blue. So I'll put in here CDZ, see if that works. Yeah, so that works, and then I'll multiply it again, all of it, by the alpha. So I'm just trying to basically get rid of as much as possible and keep only what I need. So let's go back down. A bit higher resolution here. So that looks pretty good. If we look at that, it's kind of, you can see the highlights here in the point color are matching where our geometry is, and we have some of that geometry around the center circle as well. So that works for me. Let me just name this out of good habit. Right, and then what I'll do is just hit the geometry light. And I'll take you through my general lighting setup for this as well, which we have this pointing to our geometry, and we want this to be very specific. So what did I call it? Portal geolight. And I always just switch on transform into this object in case I end up moving this. That's all fine. We do need a bluish tint because we're not actually taking the point color. And in the attenuation settings, I pretty much always use active radius just to save on render time. So, and I also tie that value to the ramp. I don't know why it doesn't do that by default, but I want this ramp to fit within that range. So say we're down to 10. I want that fall off to match. So let me save. And let's try render this. So we've got a pretty subtle light there. Which we can obviously bring up in comp if I'm going to split it. So let me actually set that up now. So in our environment mantra, in objects, I'll make sure to exclude the portal light. So that's good for our environment render, and actually I'll set the character to be phantom, because I'm going to keep him in a separate pass, but I want him to cast shadows on the environment. So this can be our straight environment mantra, and then we'll have one basically for like just the portal light, and this will be the same, except that instead of all lights in candidate, we'll just force the portal light. So actually, with that in mind, I'm going to disable this light, because we can just force it in the passes that we want. And let's try that. Luckily it's pretty quick to get these renders going, so I can pretty much test each one of these. So that's working, it's super dim. So we just want this to feel like it has a serious impact on the environment. And the nice thing about using that particle sim instead of just putting some disk is this light should actually change and flicker and cast different shadows over time, because it's using the actual particles. So that looks pretty good. I mean, I might tweak this. That's good for now, and then what I'll do is I'll set up the same thing for the character. So I'll have just the character, and in objects I'll have, let me think about this, I'll have everything, but I'll force matte the scene. And in this case I actually don't want the sky, so let's just switch that off again. So there's our character. I might change my mind later and we just include the environment and the character in the same render, but for now I know that these two will merge together fine. And then we'll have the character portal light. Once again, I could probably merge these two. So in this case we still want the portal geolight forced, and we want everything as a candidate, but we want to map the scene. So in terms of lighting paths, I mean, we could set up some extra image planes to do this as well, I guess, but in this case, as long as there's no light affecting the environment or the character, and the only light enabled is the portal geolight, that gives us a perfect lighting path to use in comp. So I can just merge that on top. So that looks pretty good to me for the environment and the character. Let me save. Now, just to set up our mantras for the particles. So we know that I have 3 different layers here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a take for each one. So let's say particles A, oh, particles B, why don't I keep doing that? And particles C. So what I'll do is no matter which node is viewed here, I'll make sure to set my particles A take to portal A and particle B over there and C over there. So if we just double check that, if I click on this and I choose particle A, B, C. So that works. And apparently I've added a bunch of stuff in the main take. Not sure. Ah, that's fine. Yeah, that works. And then I'll just duplicate this mantra. So we'll say A, B, and C or something. And I'll just make sure, and I always do this, forget to set the take. So in my head I've already made the takes, but then I forget to actually change it here, and I end up with 3 identical render layers. So just make sure we set this take on these mantras, and that's it. So basically that should do it. So let's have a quick test of that. Before I end this video, because at this point basically we'll I'll maybe tweak the lights of the portal, but I'll be rendering all of this out, and we can jump in the next video and start to do our first version of the comp before we come back and add in any other layers I've been talking about. So right now I'm just checking that the takes are doing what they should be doing. And I'm just thinking I've forgotten to do something. So this looks fine. I have this problem because in the comp, this character is going to just be sitting there in space until he comes flying through. And I've thought of that now because, so these takes work, because I actually need to add the character as a matte object. So we do want the character to matte out the particles. And that means, that might be fine for here, but definitely when we have the characters render, it's gonna get awkward to try and comp him out basically above this area. So what I'm thinking is just put down a geo and I'll object merge in the portal disk that we have. If I can remember what it's called. Portal shape. And we'll just take this move. So that should match up. Oh, it doesn't. Oh, because we're using the bulge to just warp it into the scene. So I'll basically just eyeball this, I think. I mean, actually, that makes sense because we do want him to appear before he actually gets past this ring, because we have that tunnel. So I'll just leave it there and I'll extrude. So just enough to cover him. And let me just make this a little bit bigger to be sure. So as long as we have that, oh, it's taking long because even with the portal light not visible, it still has to calculate all of that geo. So I'm usually always coming in here and just putting down like whatever. Yep, so that's cool. So he'll just sort of appear out of nowhere there, as long as we include that matte object into the character passes. So we'll say force matte, matte. That should do. Right, so I think that's good for now. That's given us plenty to render. And what I'll do personally is actually connect these up. So say effects environment, effects character, then do the light for each one, and then go ahead and render each one of these particle layers. And in that case, you just right click on the last one. Now, how do you do it again? No, you just click on the last one and go up here to controls and change this order to node by node and hit render. So that'll go all the way back up to this node, fully render all the sequence for that, move on, etc. So when I'm working at home, that's what I usually do. If I was on a farm, I would just submit all of them. So if you do have access to a render farm, you can do that, and that's great for you. Also, just remember to reset your resolutions for particles, especially. Make sure you have full res and probably at least 6 pixel samples. And that's it for now, so I'll see you in the next video. And welcome back, guys. I've decided to just do a pretty short, quick composite of the layers, some of the layers we rendered out before. I actually didn't end up rendering the environment layers yet because I feel like it might be a waste of time, given that in the next few videos I want to add some dust and some particles and make some of this debris roll about on the ground. So, but I did for now just render out the particle layers that we do have. Like, I definitely want to add a few more, but it's good to kind of bring these together and mess around with them a little bit in the comp. And usually something comes up while I'm trying to get these to look good. I'll sort of have an idea and be like, wow, yes, it would be great to have a layer that does whatever. So it's kind of useful to, at least at some point while you're working in Houdini, just render it out instead of continuously adding more and more, and just start comping what you've got, and then go back to Houdini with some new ideas and work on layers from there. So for now, what I do have is I've got the renders of the 3 layers we have. So that's what the tunnel one looks like. And also just a reminder, here in Fusion, this is the LUT. So I'm now displaying the viewport with the LUT on. And similar to how we had it set up in Houdini, you just choose OCIO, and then under Edit, there's a config. So basically, if you download the OCIO LUTs, but obviously you could use whichever LUT you want. In here, the baked LUTs are the ones that you use in like Houdini. But if I come up, there's a config, and that's what Fusion will use. And then you set your space here. So the same way I had it set up for the Mantra renders, Acer CG to sRGB. So that's that. And let's have a look at our renders. So that's that layer. Then we have the one which is supposed to be the more erratic layer. And this is the one that we attribute transferred the position of the particles onto lines that were copied around the circle. So you can kind of see it a little bit, not as much as I was hoping. But I think it adds something, especially that outer circle. There's like a slight transfer there, and I think that's pretty cool. And then this one. And this one was the one that we tried to use the pop fluid. which again, it's not as extreme as I was kind of expecting it, but I think it looks pretty cool. And also what I've done is I've plugged in, now just a note as well, you might be using Nuke instead of Fusion. So most of this is completely transferable. I think I use Nuke as well. My preferred program is Fusion, but it's pretty much the same. Like, I don't think I'm not doing anything advanced in Fusion, and you could probably find an easy way to do every one of those in Nuke as well. In this case, I've just put down a reader or a loader. I'm loading in the frame, and then you can see this has the watermark, and I'm using a rectangle just to mask that out. At the end, I might still have the watermark on, which is fine. It's just you don't want every single layer to be merging with that watermark, because we're going to add glows, and that means the watermark's going to start glowing, and I don't really want that. So let's do a quick first pass of this comp. So at least to start with, we'll just merge all these layers together. So I've got them in what I consider the right order, which the background would be the tunnel. And then this one we can merge on top. And then this layer will merge on top again. So it might not matter, because I might end up burning this in, or in Nuke it would be plus. So that's just merging them together. And I'm also going to just put down, because we don't have an environment render, I'll put down a background. Just make sure the resolution is the same. And if you are working in Fusion, the background doesn't automatically default to float 16, so always change that under the image tab. And I'll just set some sort of gray background for us here. Just quickly, because it's not that useful to view these like super intense emissive effects on black, because the minute you merge that then onto the actual rendered environment, it's going to look completely different. So I'm getting quite a lot of banding here. I'm not sure why. Let's just drop that on. Right, so I am going to just do what I usually do, and that's, I want to look mostly at them merged together and then start tweaking the colors, because I need some of these layers to stand out from the other ones. So like we might go, it's very intense, and I think it's so bright here that we're actually losing detail, so I'm just going to knock this back. And then we'll go for maybe a slightly different tint on this one. I can be quite extreme here, because I plan on color correcting it all together as well down here. So it's not that useful to do them all separately. And eventually I'll be putting some kind of grade on the whole effect to kind of make it all feel like the same thing. So this is more just sort of playing around, trying to get the layers to feel distinct from each other, and also just messing at the moment with how much range I have in the render. So you can see if I bring this down, there's quite a lot of small highlight detail there, which is good. And then I can just gamma this up to kind of bring back the low density stuff. And then this layer is also super bright at the moment. So there's lots of cool stuff going on in there. And if I don't gain down, you kind of don't see some of that. So let's go for a slightly purple tint on this. I'm just going to try something actually, and that's just gain and gamma down until I'm left with just the smaller bright parts. And then actually plug in a background, which in Nuke that would be a constant. So I'll mask that and maybe make this slightly purple. So what that's giving me is a nice flat version of the effect because it's taking just the alpha. So, you know, I can ignore all the color, the point color I have on there and just get a flat version of the effect. I actually do this quite a lot, and it just gives another layer of something to work with in the comp. And then I'll just merge this back on here and burn it in. And this is the one that's the same as plus. And if I'm burning it in, I should be switching off alpha. Basically, when you burn it in, it actually adds the alpha on top of the alpha underneath. So you'll end up with alpha values over 1, which isn't good because when you start merging that on top of backgrounds, you start to get some pretty strange effects. So usually if you're plussing or if you're burning in the case of Fusion, make sure to switch off alpha from the merge. So you can see what I've kind of done here is just taken this raw layer and just like brought out some of the information that was missing just a bit, and then really added contrast to these highlights and merged them back on top. And already I think that looks pretty cool. Yep. So I quite like that. So that's kind of like what I'm always doing when I first have a look at my layers in comp. I'm kind of seeing the ranges on each one, changing them all slightly, bringing them back together, and even though it looks kind of ridiculous, then I'll start color correcting and adding glows from here to try and blend them all together. So for one, put down a brightness and contrast, and probably just maybe add a little bit of contrast here. I want to make sure I've got enough bright points, and then I'll go and check alpha. So I'm looking at the values popping up at the bottom here, just to make sure I don't have anything above 1. So that's fine. So bring this right down. So this is, especially because I'm going to add some glow here, this is completely unworkable, I think. So I'm usually knocking back the super bright stuff and then adding the glow and then maybe gaining the whole thing back up. Now my glow, I don't use the glow tools in the comp. I'm always making it myself, and I always make it from scratch for some reason. I don't know why. So the reason I do that is just to get much more control. So you'll see what I mean here. I have one blur. Actually, I'm going to put down a brightness and contrast here and just clip white. You see what happens if I do that. So if it's quite contrasty and you start blurring, the only parts that stand out are the super bright ones, and I kind of want to flatten that before I add a glow, so I'll clip that all down. So you want a small blur, and a medium, and then I like to have a super massive. And I'll basically burn all of these in. Switch off the alphas. And then I know you're probably thinking this is ridiculously roundabout way to get a glow, but I promise you it's worth it. And I'll burn the glow on top as well. Right, so that's fully gained. I mean, you can see here. I mean, you can't work with that. Here I have a much more reasonable level to add a glow and then color correct afterwards. So in terms of the control I was talking about with the 3 blur glow, I basically knock all these off, and then looking at the image, I'll add just enough gain of the small glow just so that you see it, and I'll zoom in here, maybe on this bright bit. Just enough. And the thing I see so much is people will just slap a glow on and you end up with this kind of thing, and that's the worst. So just enough there that you see it, and then onto the medium one. The idea here is to kind of make the small glow really fade. So I'm just going to exaggerate this to show what I mean. If you had a super visible small glow like this, then your medium would need to be just bright enough to make that small glow feel like you can't tell where it falls off. So what I'm looking for is basically a super slow fall off of the glow until it reaches the hot spot. And you should never be able to identify like the end of the glow. So you see, even something like that, you can't tell where the glow is ending. So that's about right. And then I can come and like brighten it up here or make it more blue. Trying to see why this background is so banded. Yeah, it's on the right thing. I wonder if it's the ramp. We need to keep an eye on that if we bring the environment renders in, just to make sure the dark areas aren't too banded. I'm not sure why that's happening. It might actually be my monitor settings. So I mean, the glow is pretty heavy, but looks kind of cool. Also, I wasn't expecting to see so many dark areas, but I kind of like it. So in the end, what we might do is say, once the portal's on the environment, we'll basically burn that in as well, so we get rid of every single dark area, which is the more classical, fully emissive magic. But yeah, I hope you can see how much of an effect this really sort of customized glow can have on it. So that's kind of like my basic approach to comping magic in general. And then I usually follow it up with another few color correctors or brightness and contrast, just to then rein in the colors again, because you can see I've got some pretty radically different colors here. I'm then dimming it down quite a lot, and I can bring it back up. Maybe I'll put this glow to 0.5. You know, I can add more contrast here or go the other way. But in general, if I'm happy, then I'm usually just shifting the color tones slightly. So everything goes slightly green and a bit more blue, and you can see how the colors start to blend together. And those differences we had here are just helping separate them slightly. And then looking at the finished image, I'll come back and try things like, say, before the glow. I've got this gain that's knocked right back, and I'll try and just gamma up slightly. Maybe reduce the saturation a bit. And I definitely want this middle layer to kind of pop. So you can be really artistic at this point, because you're basically looking at a finished image and you can tweak every element of that to get exactly what you want. So a few other things, a few little tips before I stop this video. Especially if you're using Fusion, there's the displace, which is really useful for magic. And not only the background, which we will do once we've got the environment in, but also just to displace itself. So like I can take that and maybe this. I will clamp this again. And then plug that into the displace. And we put the center at the center of the portal, and see how it kind of warps everything outward. So especially useful for us because we haven't rasterized the particles into a volume. And I mean, if you look at these, the point count's not enough that you can't tell its individual points. So displacing it's kind of helping slightly to feel more like a continuous magical surface. And obviously, I mean, we could go extreme with that. But I don't think we want that. Just a subtle distortion is actually works quite nicely. So yeah, that's the basic. I mean, if you kind of ask me in general, what do I do when I'm comping magic? This is what most of it looks like. So I'll lay these all out, look at the final image, and then come back and tweak individual colors and glows while looking at the final result. So we will do more of that later. I'll save this, and in the next video we will start adding the environmental effects and make a few extra layers for the portal. We'll render those out as well, and then eventually dive back into the comp and finish this effect. So I'll see you in the next video. Hello, welcome back, and I'm just looking over the short comp we did in the last video. As I said, what I usually do is once I've come up with a few layers in Houdini, I'll just render those out and start comping just to see where it's going, and I might get a few ideas of elements that I might need that I might not have thought of before. So that's exactly what's happening here, because I haven't changed anything since the last one, but I can already see that, well, obviously I've mentioned before that I do want to add the kind of flaky embers or ash, like something more solid feeling. But also looking at this, for me, it's kind of missing a sort of base. So it feels a little bit like insubstantial for me. If I watch this, it doesn't feel like there's much like density in the world. So it doesn't feel powerful. So my thought is, I don't even need to simulate anything. I just need basically a ton of points that I can sit behind the portal here, and I can have some kind of noise moving through it. Because it doesn't need to be very visible. It could be pretty subtle, but just to kind of fill in some of those gaps. Yeah, so let's jump into Houdini and maybe work on those 2 additional layers I'm talking about before we start to mess around with the environmental effects. Because once we have those 2, I think that's pretty much most of the actual portal effect done. I mean, and then we'll, obviously there's loads we can still do in the comp, but let's concentrate on those 2. Now, I don't want to spend too long doing them, so I'm just going to try a few things very quickly. Right, so what do I want? I want a base that can cover pretty much the whole back of the portal. So I'll just use this sim as a reference for scale. And then I'll grab our circle. Let's see what we've got here. Yeah, and I know this is super high res, so I'll resample that quickly. And then I'm just going to extrude this to get me the scale I need. So I want this to at least cover the whole thing. I think I need to switch off output front, yeah. So something like that, and then I'll scatter points and just mess around with some noises. Okay. Put down a VOP now. Put down a scatter. So we'll need loads of points. I guess I'll keep it a little bit lower for now. And then, now what I would do, and I probably will do later, is use a unified noise. But it's actually a bit buggy at the moment, and it's very slow. So I think for now, just to explain sort of like my thought process behind this extra element, I'll just use a turbulent noise just to keep us going. And then if it doesn't work that well, replace it with a unified noise later, just because well, if I end up needing to use a Worley, I could actually just use that by itself. Let's try that now. So I mean, I like the unified noise because there's so much control, and you can add, you could add the warps directly in the noise, and you can use different types of fractal over here, so you can get a very detailed, very interesting noise very easily. The problem is the speed. It's a very slow one. Let's just stick with the simple one for now anyway. What I want is I actually want to transform this noise in a way that it can feel like it's stretching outwards. So I think it would be pretty strange to have this sort of uniform layout and then have our dynamic effects on top of this. So I still want this to feel like it's stretching out. So what I'm going to do is add a point to the origin, and I'm going to color this point cloud white. Let's go black. I'll make the point white. Use our old attribute transfer. So what I want is just a smooth fall off, and obviously at some point I'm going to need to multiply anything I do with the noise by that sort of white to black range so that it falls off at the edge. So let's just try and get something super smooth here. That looks pretty good. And then basically plug that color into a transform matrix. So here I just want to take the point position of this disk and transform it here in the VOP to change the way the noise is being mapped. So because I know that color range now is going from, I guess, white to black, it's going to scale those points by 1 over here and by 0 out there. So let's just increase the frequency. Whoa, that's cool. Very cool. Actually, I might want to add, I'm going to add this turbulent noise as well. And you can come up with some really cool shapes just by combining stuff with the position before the actual noise. So I mean, I can spend ages just playing around with the settings for these noises in Bops. So let me try and not get too distracted with this. Just switch that off for now. So in this case, right, we have our sort of distortion. I'm going to try something here, is actually set this to white and then change the whiteness of this value, because essentially that's just scale. Yeah, this is cool because this is small scale at the circle and then it's stretching more and more as it goes out. So that's pretty cool. I mean, yeah, something like that looks pretty good. Let's try to re-add this. Get a bit of detail in there. And then, what do I have? So I've got, alright, so yeah, this doesn't really give me the range now. So if I remap this based on its own color, but just to get back that black and white fall off, and I'm not seeing it because this range is so high, so I'll just take this value from the super high color and map this ramp the same. So there's our range back, and I'll just put this in the second input here. We'll import color from the second input and multiply it here at the end. I'm going to put a ramp here as well. So I can play with how bright it's getting and where. So make sure that there's no color on the actual edges, and then it goes pretty bright in the middle. So something like that. And probably put a ramp on the noise itself as well. So I can play with clamping these values. Obviously, I don't want to make it too contrasty, because the whole point of this layer is to fill up the whole background of that effect. But you can see I'm just kind of messing around. See what happens. So that's my basic plan now, is come up with just a noise that will fill up that background, and we don't have to even worry about simulating that. What I could do is maybe add this kind of just offset. I'll just go put $F in this offset for this noise. Oh, that's a bit fast. Like, it doesn't need to be fancy. I'll come back and play with these settings as well. Right, so the problem is now we've just got this disk that's doing nothing, so I'm going to copy our closer animation here. just make sure it actually goes somewhere. I mean, that's not going to look good. Guess I could have it fading off before it actually closes. Let me add some more points. It's a super nice effect though. Just do what I did with the other simulated layers as well, and just basically try and keep it clean, as in I'm going to delete, points below a certain value. So I think I was using remove point in a wrangle, and I've just used the delete this time. Oh, I'm going old school. Yeah, so just kind of, clean up where we can, because I'm going to use the same alpha. Where is it? Well, I don't think I need the delete section. I guess I could use either or, but just the alpha based on color thing. And then let me just add one more VOP here and just basically remap color with a normal RGB ramp to give me an actual color. So we've been going for that sort of blue. Okay. So, I mean, I'm not like 100% happy with this. I can spend a lot more time, and as I said, I might end up using unified noise or just tweaking the noises and the ramps I've made. But it's a pretty simple, straightforward, uncomplicated, interesting looking noise to replicate our portal itself. We do need it opening. Can worry about that later. Just had a thought to try this attribute noise again. Yeah, that's not bad. That gives a kind of cool effect. So I wonder if I can add something interesting to this. It's too frequent. But I might be able to use the frequency of this position noise to kind of make it feel like it's moving or like unfolding. So I could start, say, we know the portal appears at frame 20. So I could start with a kind of super high frequency and then just have it kind of scaling up for the rest of its life. Just do a quick flip book here. Doesn't seem to be doing much. What's going on? Well, it's definitely moving. I guess this, the fact that the noise itself is updating is a bit distracting. All right, because it's, yeah. I only keyed it from frame 20. This is a pretty lucky effect I have going here, because the attribute noise I've switched on centered to avoid the whole point cloud moving around. So in that case, when I scale the element size, it's sort of scaling because it's scaling from the center. So it's already giving me that effect, like as if it's sort of unfolding outwards. Yeah, that's a pretty lucky benefit there. So I mean, you can see, like, even in this small stream, there's plenty of things to like tweak and mess around with here, and you get, I mean, it's not great. It's not like, it doesn't feel dynamic like the rest of these effects we have, but we just need it to subtly sit in the background. And I will need to scale it on as well. I do have an attribute already set up for that. It's this one. Transfer. No, not that one. Oh, down here with the warping. I have a keyed attribute transfer. So I can just plug that in and plug in this, and then I should get the opening for free pretty much. It's a bit slow. Yeah, there you go. So I'll get the same kind of thing I have for the main ones, and then I have that sort of rippling noise running through it. So I'll probably just play around with those noise settings, make sure I'm actually getting a very full feeling effect that'll fill up that background nicely. Maybe play with those noises that are adding movement as well. And probably duplicate what I have here and just make Portal D essentially. So let me do that on my own time, and when we come back we'll add the flake. We'll work on the flake system. So see you then.